2 juz of the Quran. The lengthier one. Going forward, inshallah, it should be much less than that. But we read the juz 15 and 16, so we've already passed the halfway mark. So in this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about many things, and there are actually some very famous surahs that come part of the 15th and 16th juz. So the first and foremost one is Surah Al-Isra, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pretty much talks about what is currently happening in the world, specifically in the area of Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set a system. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what is going to happen, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also gives us the end result. So for a believer, our belief is on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surely one day will return Masjid al-Aqsa completely back to the Muslims. That's a fact, it's going to happen. But the question is, when will it happen? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promises are connected with how much connection we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how much ibadat we make. It's not on the basis of the other things that we see, right? The other planning and the other scheming that people think is going to bring about change. It might bring a little bit, right? You raise your voice, that's part of it, right? But it's not the main aspect which is going to bring change. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us iman and that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came, he shows what the promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are connected with. The promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are connected with amal. The ummah comes back onto 100% salah, the promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there. The Quran is filled with that the believers will always have the upper hand. The believers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them power. The system will run under the believers, under the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when will that come into fruition? That will come when the believers are actually true believers. Like how Umar radiallahu anhu, he said that Allah gave us izzah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us power not on the basis of who we were and what our lineages were, but He gave it to us on the basis of Islam. And He said, if the ummah does not follow the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then your defeat is not going to be in the hands of other people. It might seem like that outwardly, but your defeat is going to be directly by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will make circumstances such that you will be defeated. That's why Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam gave a prophecy to Sahaba radiallahu anhu that a time is going to come where the ummah, their lives will have no value. And he gave the example, he said just how when somebody's hungry, we already broke our fast, we're going to have dinner. Just how when somebody's hungry and food is presented to him, right? How much does he enjoy that food, and how, for lack of a better term, how crazy does the person go over the food? And a person that hasn't eaten for 2-3 days, you put food in front of him and he'll eat it very quickly. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the state of my ummah is going to be such that they're going to be so weak that the enemy will come and they'll sit around, and the analogy he gave is that they'll sit around the table, and he said they'll eat from their lives like how a person who is very hungry, he eats from the food. So then the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, they said that is this going to be because of the fact that we're going to be so weak that we're not going to have many in numbers, or are we going to have the lowest amount of numbers? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he told Sahaba radiallahu anhu, he said in fact the opposite is going to be there. He said, but antum kathir. He said the numbers that you have now and the numbers that you're going to see over there is going to be you're going to be in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. But he said the difference is going to be your hearts are not going to have the true Islam, the true deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's because of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will disgrace you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will show you what we're seeing today. So the proof in that is the prophecy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who took directly the ilm from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what we need to come back onto, and this is what we find in the Quran time and time again. These reminders that are there, and these times that we listen to the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? We ponder, we reflect over these things, and the question becomes, what am I going to do to be part of this change? And that first and foremost thing is to completely leave the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and come onto the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then everything else will fall in line, because it's in the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And like I said, for a believer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says a day is going to come, definitely, where you will be successful, where you will have everything in your control and in your power. Right? But the time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connected with how quick we go back to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So within that you also found yesterday we read different surahs, which a lot of them were famous surahs, right? So after Surah Al-Isra, we read Surah Al-Kahf. So this is a very important surah to be read, just in terms of its virtue. We know the fitna and the trials and temptations of Dajjal that will come, and is a prophecy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how hard it is going to be for a person to hold on to his iman at that time. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him the control of weather. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him the control of many, many things. And those people who have kufr and disbelief in their heart, or they're very shaky on their iman, they will take him, na'udhu billah, to be Lord. But the people who have iman, the more they see things happening on his hands, the more it's going to increase them in their iman and belief on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To the point where he's going to take one person, he's going to kill him, and then also bring him back to life. So this isn't going to be because of him. Allah is giving him that to test the people. On his right side will be paradise, and on his left side will be Jahannam. But his paradise is actually Jahannam, and his Jahannam is actually paradise. So doing exactly the opposite of the system of Dajjal will land you into the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in paradise. And then in order for us to be protected from that, the ulama mentioned in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that we read Surah Kahf once a week. Right? Meaning from the Maghrib of Thursday night to the Maghrib of Friday night. If you read that, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, you are guaranteed protection from Dajjal. If you can't read the whole thing, start off with reading the first ruku of Surah Kahf and the last ruku of that. Praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us all the ability to bring across and set everybody's requested to go for dinner. So.